We move from Finland to Canada, Everything and Nothing, the food in Canada in the 21st century, Le Dépanneur cookbook by Len Senater. I don't know if Len is here. Yes, thank you so much for, you will see a fantastic and a little bit crazy book. Thank you so much, Len.
Okay, thank you very much. I know we're running a little late, so I'm going to try to stay on time. So I'm Len Senater. I'm the owner and founder of The Dépanneur. The Dépanneur is a place where interesting food things happen. It's a venue I established in 2011 to showcase the incredible diversity of food in my city, in Toronto. We invite different guest cooks, both amateur and professional, to host different kinds of pop-up food events. I've hosted thousands of different dinner parties over the last 15 years. Now, how did this come to be? Well, you can say that I've gone through life stomach first. You see that my mother had the wherewithal to wrap me in plastic wrap before feeding me these spaghetti, but although I never worked in the food industry, I traveled a lot, I ate everywhere that I went, and I found that some of my most powerful and memorable experiences were around food and around the sharing of food. And so I was curious, how could I bring more of those kinds of experience to the place where I lived? And so this is an idea that sort of animated things, where you start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And so I became, in around 2010, interested in the phenomenon of pop-up dining that was happening around the world. In New York, in Paris, in London, in San Francisco, all of these interesting non-restaurant food things were happening, and I was like, this is so cool, why is this not happening in Toronto? And as I began to look into it, the impression that I got was that it was just too expensive to set up all the infrastructure to do a one-off food event. And so I had this idea, what if I created a place that had everything you needed so that you could host a pop-up food event so you didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time? And then we could invite a much more interesting and diverse group of people to be hosts, and the events could be much cheaper, and we could have a much more diverse and interesting group of people as guests. And so in this way, we hope to lower the barrier to entry. And so I found a decrepit corner store. It was, a real dump, but it was very, very cheap. And this turned out to be extremely important. And then with 6 months of work, we sort of turned it into a little food space where we started off with a little combination cafe corner store during the day, and a brunch on the weekends, and hosting our pop-up food events in the evenings. You know, it was I had never worked in the industry. I had no chef. We didn't serve drinks. None of my plates or dishes matched. But it was a vibrant community and a co-working space for food. And I made a lot of mistakes, but because it was very cheap, these mistakes weren't catastrophic. And I don't know that that would be possible in the current rental climate. And so I called it the Dépanneur. And why did I call it the Dépanneur? Because I'm originally from Montreal. And in Montreal, you call all of your little local corner stores the Dépanneur, the way you might call it in New York a deli or bodega. And the etymology is a little interesting, because if you're driving down the street and your car breaks, you might say, je suis en peine, meaning I'm stuck or I'm in trouble. And so the dépanneur is the person who would get you unstuck or out of trouble. And so, yes, I was a homesick Montrealer with a corner store, but I also felt that food in Toronto, and myself to some extent, was a little bit en peine, and I hoped that maybe je peux le dépanner a little bit. So it quickly became a vibrant hub for the local food community. We was a place where we could make and sell and share food. We could bring together the producers and the cooks and the diners, the seaters, the feeders, and the eaters together under one roof. And the rent was low enough that we could continue to survive in this sort of unusual business model. And over the next few years, I hosted thousands of unique pop-up cooking classes, dinner parties, talks, and experiments in different ways to create community through food. And what emerged from this was that I really wasn't in the food business at all. I wasn't a restaurant. That's not what I was selling. It was the interesting and meaningful human connections that emerged around the table that really is what animated the space. So I was in the meaningful human connection business, and I just used food because it was the quickest and fastest and easiest way to do that. And this took an interesting detour in 2016 when there was a big influx of Syrian refugees into Canada, so many so that it overwhelmed the settlement machinery, and so many families were stuck in hotels for months. They had no kitchens, they had no way to prepare their own food. So again, with this idea of start where you are and do what you can, I was like, well, I have a kitchen, and I already have this strange restaurant that invites total strangers to do all the cooking. It didn't feel like that much of a stretch to extend the invitation to Rahaf Al-Akbani and Ismail Abu Fakr to invite the ladies to come and cook their food. And this turned into an incredible project that over the next 3 years would work with over 80 Syrian families and allow them to generate over $150,000 before becoming its own nonprofit organization that went off to create social and economic opportunity for newcomer women from all over the world. Oh, whoops. Yeah, and so this really did become international news. It was published around the world, and it really represented a Canadian response to the Syrian civil war and humanitarian crisis. I took it as far as I could, but eventually sort of turned my attention back to the dépanneur. We rode the wave of high publicity and things, and we're at this point hosting maybe 300 different food events a year, and this is what is sort of a one-man show. So I was very busy, and this took us right through until the COVID era, and then suddenly we came to a screaming halt because we couldn't do what we were designed to do, which was to gather around the table to make and share food. We had one of the longest lockdowns in the world for over 2 years. All the restaurants in Toronto were closed. So again, we did what we could under the circumstances. I served a lot of takeout through an open window. We hosted some some socially distanced picnics, under a bridge in the city, and we basically tried to continue to find a way to connect people through food. This is when I had the idea to reach out to hundreds of the different cooks that I had worked with over the last 15 years and gather stories and recipes, and this became the seed of the idea of a cookbook. I began to do my sort of research, and I quickly discovered that the only business model worse than the one I already had was the Canadian cookbook publishing business model. And so there was no way that this was going to create the kind of book that would do justice to the talents and stories of these people. So I actually put it out into the world as a Kickstarter, as a crowd-funded project. It went on to become the most successful Canadian cookbook Kickstarter project ever. Then the publishers were very interested in it. I worked over the next year with Senya Hotek, a very talented photographer who also has a recipe in the book from Bosnia. And it was a revelation to see these humble home-cooked dishes made by these amateur chefs photographed so beautifully. We also interviewed all 100 chefs and gathered their food stories and included them along with the recipes to amplify their voices. Just a little tip, if anyone here does want to make a cookbook, doing an anthology of 100 contributors who have never written a recipe and maybe don't speak English as a first language is not the easiest way to do it, I discovered. I had been a graphic designer before starting the DEP, so I ended up designing the book myself. And it contains 100 recipes from 100 different people who cooked at the dépanneur, along with some memoirs, some manifesto, quotes from all of them. I put in 5 recipes of my own that are all made from leftovers of the other dishes, because that's all I ate for 10 years. And we closed the dépanneur's College Street location at the end of 2022. I took a sabbatical. I worked to finish the book. While we were doing that, I began to host some communal table pop-up events outdoors. And one of them was in cooperation with an organization called Dashmawan Ben Manzinjan, which is an indigenous food security organization. They feed the people. They serve the sort of vulnerable indigenous populations in Toronto, and became very clear that in Toronto, although it's the biggest city in the country, it's probably one of the most diverse food cities in the world. You can eat almost anything from almost anywhere in the world except the country we actually live in. There's not a single indigenous-owned restaurant in the city of Toronto. And that became something that became central to my vision of the dépanneur moving forward. So Last year, I created a new space, a private dining room and culinary studio for about 32 people in a building called the Center for Social Innovation, in collaboration with an organization called the Canadian Center for Food and Ecology. And in this new space, I have joined forces with Chef Taylor Parker, who's an Indigenous chef from the Mohawk Six Nations territory, and we run a monthly program now called the Indigenous Food Lab, where we explore ingredients that are native to Ontario, right, through an Indigenous lens. This is important because Ontario grows a lot of food, but almost all the food we grow is not from Ontario. And there is all this delicious things that grow in Ontario, but you can't buy any of them in the stores. So how are we supposed to have a terroir? How are we supposed to understand what it tastes like to live in this particular place in the world? And so our Indigenous Food Lab works with Taylor. It has no published menu. And in this way, you know, people come trusting to discover what is in season, what is available, and also to investigate and interrogate the idea of the restaurant and the chef. The idea that you're going to know what you are going to eat a month ahead of time represents a very deep conceit, a very deeply colonial relationship to the land, right? You know, here perhaps the role of the chef is not to make the exact same dish perfectly the same way every day, year after year, regardless of season, regardless of abundance and availability. Perhaps the chef will take what is available and make it as delicious and nourishing as possible, even if that dish may never be made again. And to close, I just want to say that from this collaboration, in Canada, we are starting to do land acknowledgements, where we acknowledge the land that we're from. The place in Toronto where I live is called is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a covenant between the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I just want to take 2 seconds, because even in just the title, The Dish with One Spoon, suggests some important things to me, that when we eat together, we are brought into relation with one another. We are brought into relation between the feeders and the eaters, between us at the table. You know, if there is only one dish, then we all have a responsibility to keep that dish full, to keep that dish clean. If there is only one spoon, then we all must make sure that everyone gets to hold that spoon, that they might be nourished from what it contains. And I feel that if this is what we can learn just from the title, how much more is there for us to discover as we really begin to unpack this going forward? Thank you. Thank you so much.